This hour, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth facing increasing scrutiny and new questions about U.S. strikes on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. Yesterday, Hegseth addressed what he called an interesting week in a speech in California and defended the admiral who oversaw the controversial first strike in the operation.
And we've made sure to remind Admiral Bradley and others involved in Operation Southern Spear, we have your back. You're taking out narco-terrorists in our hemisphere. On behalf of the American people, we're sinking drug boats and deterring the poisoning of the American people. We will always have our military leadership's back.
It came as lawmakers continue to address video they were shown Thursday of that first strike in September, which resulted in a so-called double-tap strike that killed 2 shipwrecked survivors. Admiral Frank Bradley briefed key members of Congress who were shown unedited video of the incident. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agreed that Admiral Bradley told them that there was no kill-them-all order from Hegseth, but their accounts differed from there. The top Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, defended the operation.
I saw 2 survivors trying to flip a boat loaded with drugs down for the United States, back over, so they could stay in the fight. If you think these strikes are justified and righteous, as I do, and I want them to continue, then of course the second strike, when you have 2 survivors who are trying to flip their boat back over and continue on their mission, remain in the battle.
The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, however, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, called the video troubling and shared details with our colleague Jen Psaki earlier this week.
What I saw in that video, and I'm hoping that the American people will have an opportunity to see it and judge for themselves, were 2 individuals whose boat had been incinerated and capsized, clinging for life without any visible means of survival or support. And then they were killed. There's just no way to get away from the fact that the United States killed 2 individuals who were shipwrecked and in massive distress.
In the meantime, we're learning additional details about what Admiral Bradley told lawmakers in those briefings and what they might have seen in the video. CNN reports that the admiral said the alleged drug traffickers killed in the September 2nd strike were heading to link up with another, larger vessel that was bound for Suriname. That's according to 2 sources with direct knowledge of his remarks. MS Now has not independently confirmed that report. While the Wall Street Journal and other outlets report the 2 survivors of the attack struggled to flip a remnant of their capsized boat over the course of an hour and waved as an aircraft passed overhead, according to lawmakers and other people briefed on the attack. Joining us now on all these conflicting stories are Laura Barone-Lopez, MS Now White House reporter, and Alex Ward, national security reporter for The Wall Street Journal. Thank you guys for joining us this Saturday morning and kicking off the weekend. You've both been doing some incredible reporting this week on all of this flurry of developments since this Washington Post story broke last week. Alex, I want to ask you what exactly we know about Admiral Bradley and how much we can trust what he is briefing these lawmakers on. This is someone who William McRaven, an admiral who oversaw the bin Laden raid, said called one of the finest officers that he's ever served with. He displayed a strong moral compass, impeccable character, and someone that he has always trusted to do the right thing. Is this someone who lawmakers believe did the right thing during this double tap mission?
Well, that's a complicated question, actually. I mean,
John the Capehart with his throat does not believe so.
Well, so let's just start with the fact that Bradley, when he was in this briefing with lawmakers and staff, said he defended every part of his decision, and there was nothing for him to really move on. I mean, there was a video, and he was explaining his thinking throughout the entire video. And if you asked him, and as people did, why did you choose this moment to strike? Were you asking lawyers about what you could do, et cetera? He said, I asked lawyers. I made a decision that I could go ahead and do the strike. Everything I did was lawful. That's according to him. Of course, we know that there are people who saw the video who said, how could you think that was a lawful strike? Yeah. Based on everything that this video is showing us, including a capsized boat, There was no evidence that there were drugs underneath, although Bradley's argument was that hull, that remnant of the hull, was floating because there were drugs underneath. Again, not video of the
floats.
Right.
cocaine.
It does float.
There were no evidence of radios or communications equipment. There were no evidence of arms. Maybe they were destroyed or under the boat. We don't know. And what we do know is that there were men who did not have their shirts on. They were struggling for at least an hour to flip over this thing, which is really hard to do if anyone's tried to flip over a 40-foot boat before. And then
lawmakers showed the hour-long.
Yes.
The thing that is so confusing for me is these men are not combatants, right? I know the White House has said we have these narco terrorists, and that has helped them unlock some of the military resources and the ability to do some of these strikes. But even if they were, Laura, even if these folks were considered combatants, we have rules of engagement with combatants, and it's important for people to remember drones were how this happened. They said that we didn't have like military men in boats nearby, so there was no danger to the American service folks in this at all.
That's true. So I think one part of your question I want to address, which is that, yes, there were a lot of lawmakers, including some Republicans, who started off from the point of this entire operation is unlawful and that these shouldn't be carried out, period. We're talking about the first strike.
Right.
The first strike should not be
2nd,
carried out, period. Any first strike, let alone a second strike. But then you get to the added part that there were 2 survivors that were, according to, the HASC, House Armed Services ranking member who I spoke to, Adam Smith, the Democrat, he's a top Democrat on the committee. He was like, for 48 minutes or so, the men, the 2 survivors are clinging to the half of what's left of the boat, to the back side of it because it's flipped over. And at one point they start waving towards the end. I mean, he was like, there's no way. He said even Admiral Bradley said to them that that he didn't think this boat was ever going to be operable again.
Yeah.
So at that point, Bradley's justification was essentially what Alex said, which was conceivably there are still drugs there. Conceivably, maybe there are people that they're radioing to or others, their compatriots who are going to come and rescue them and then take the drugs on. But the lawmakers who saw the video said there was no one coming to get them. They were just stranded there. And they just said it just strained belief to think that somehow they were going to, quote, return to the fight, which is the way it was described.
And just really quickly, they double tap these 2 guys, but in October there's another strike, and we save 2 people and send them back to their countries. What's the difference? Help me understand the difference, because it's very confusing.
Well, Bradley was asked about that by the lawmakers, saying why were there 2 survivors in October that then you repatriated to their home countries? And he said because after the first strike, those survivors were just floating around in the water and were not clinging to the boat, and they were not in the vicinity of the drugs, and so therefore there was no way that they could get the drugs and take them on forward to another vessel or to the United States.
I'm sorry, Alex. Reading the stories all week, my mind has been exploding. Listening to this conversation at the table, I'm just like, how is this even possible? To the point, you have 2 survivors in another strike repatriated to their home countries. If this is a war, why aren't they in federal custody? Why does the United States not have them, and why aren't they being asked questions about who they're working for? I mean, so if this is a war, then why isn't the Secretary of War acting like that for real, that this is a war? As you can tell, this story drives me absolutely bananas, and I think that this Admiral Bradley, who everyone had so much faith in going into these hearings, saying like, this guy is going to tell the truth, this guy is going to be the one to lay everything out, and apparently he did, but it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because you are the one who's, both of you, done the reporting. It sounds to me like, look, I'm just following orders. The ultimate order is to kill these people. And so here you have guys floating, they're waving. Initial reports like they were waving for, other people to come and get into the fight. Could they have been waving for help?
Here's Bradley's argument that floating boat was floating because of the drugs, and that because it was still floating,
Half a boat.
fair enough, fair enough.
Floating flotsam.
Because they could have conceivably, his argument, could have conceivably still floated to land, collected those drugs, and continued to
I
fight.
conceivably could be Santa Claus. But so how is this? I'm trying to understand. I'm not a lawyer, but
Not
if you
according to
look
Megyn Kelly.
Correct.
No, Megyn Kelly says I can't be Santa Claus because Santa Claus is white
Oh, my
children.
God!
Anyway, Alex, back to the original thing. You look at the letter of the law and then apply it to everything that's been reported by you and Laura and everyone else has been doing great work on this, and I don't see how any of this is legal unless you stretch the bounds of legality and constitutionality like a rubber band to the point where it's about to break.
Well,
That's quite an argument that a lot of Democrats and law of war experts will make. I will say one key point of the meeting that I found interesting is Bradley was explaining that when, during those moments of deciding when to do the second strike or not, he spoke to his JAG, his Judge Advocate General, for the military advice. And then he said, after that, I still decided these men were shipwrecked, therefore, these men were not shipwrecked, so therefore I can hit them. But when he was asked, what did your JAG advise? He did not say what the JAG advised.
Is this the same JAG? Is this a new JAG?
Yes.
Thank you, because they fired all of the JAGs. So is this a Trump administration appointed?
I don't know
JAG?
if it's a Trump appointed JAG, but this is Admiral Halsey, who was in charge of some of the command beforehand. He obviously is retiring, I believe, as early as next week, and his JAG is no longer a part of these operations as well. I think there's two key points here, which is that yes, Democrats, it's not just Democrats, though. There's also Republicans like Rand Paul who are saying that these are extrajudicial killings that essentially, he calls them extrajudicial killings because of the fact that a lot of lawmakers don't necessarily believe, yes, that we are in a war, that this is not an armed conflict.
Because they're supposed to declare it.
Right.
That part.
And then the other thing is that when it comes to the legality question, Adam Smith told me, the congressman, that he found out during that briefing that the legal memo that the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel wrote to try to explain the legality of all this was finished being written the day after that first strike.
Oh, my God.
So that's a still classified legal memo, and some lawmakers have seen it, some haven't. But again, a lot of lawmakers want things like that declassified because they think it should be.
Alex, just to put a pin in this before we have to wrap up, but you had reported, you're one of the reporters on this report, that Halsey was asked by Hegseth to step down because of disagreements that they had that intensified over the legality of lethal strikes. When you're looking at the relationship between Bradley and Hegseth, how would you characterize that? And does it look like Hegseth is going to ask Bradley to ultimately be the fall guy here if lawmakers, Republican lawmakers specifically, start to call for a resignation? I mean,
it's clearly not a good relationship, because even though Hegseth didn't say you're fired, he was like, it would be really nice if you stepped down, effectively. So that's a firing in name. I will say, I know there's disagreement on this point. I will say that when you look at Hegseth's career, he has made a career in books and on television in defending troops who have either stretched or violated the laws of war. And even if he saw this video and considered it a problem or anything like that, what he has done consistently is defend people who are in a situation like this. So I know people think he's throwing Bradley under the bus, et cetera. I understand that interpretation.
He'd be like, I left the room.
No, that's fine, but he still authorized the operation. Yeah, it was written down, and the authorization was to sink the boat, destroy the drugs, and kill the terrorists. And so if you are the commander of that operation, you know what you are authorized to do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you do that second strike, but you have the authorization to do it. And so what he's saying is this man carried out the operation that I authorized and that I conceived of after talking to lawyers, et cetera. So I actually don't see it as he did it. He's saying this man, you might criticize him, but he fulfilled the obligation of the authorized operation that I gave him.
And to a fuller point, we've seen video all week of Pete Hegseth in that crazy gathering of military leaders saying the rules of engagement are out. They're done.
Joining me now, we have Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He serves on the House Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees, and he's announced just 2 weeks ago his candidacy for governor of California in 2026. So, Congressman, welcome, and we are going to get to your big announcement.
Alex.
But let's start with the allegations against FBI Director Kash Patel over his personal use of the FBI jet. Listen to what he said in response.
I've also used the airplane less than my prior two predecessors. And yes, I'm entitled to a personal life just like my other agency had counterparts with their partners. So do I support my girlfriend? Absolutely. And do I take trips with her? Absolutely. I am the only FBI director to turn over information related to travel. And that information shows one thing. I am a steward of the taxpayer dollars.
Okay, that last part right there, given his claims of being a steward of the taxpayer dollars, what do you make of his defense?
I want Kash Patel to protect his girlfriend. There are sick people out there, and you're seeing lawmakers and elected officials and individuals like the director being threatened all the time, and that extends to family members. I just want to see everyone in our country protected the way that he's protecting his girlfriend. And on his watch, as he's going after the president's political opponents, what has happened? We saw a lawmaker in Minnesota assassinated. He didn't even bother to go the same day as he did with Charlie Kirk to visit those grieving families. Charlie Kirk was assassinated. An individual attacked a Mormon church. And then just recently, a National Guardsman assassinated. Another one is fighting for their life. They have taken their eye off the ball to go after the president's political opponents while leaving the rest of us at risk. So if he wants to protect his girlfriend, that's fine. But most Americans are asking, why can't you protect the rest of us?
Points well taken on all that. Your colleagues, though, on the House Judiciary Committee are asking Patel for all travel documents. They want it by December 15th. So the question is, what happens if he refuses to hand them over? Let's say he offers to reimburse the cost of the flights. Does that just resolve the issue?
No, actually, transparency would resolve the issue, and being a good steward of the taxpayer dollars would resolve the issue. But again, the issue here is that Americans want to be protected and they want their costs to come down. And instead, what are they seeing? That the president is using taxpayer dollars through Kash Patel to go after his opponents. Bill Pulte is another individual who's been doing this on behalf of the president. And then you have the president's political opponents spending time and money defending themselves and seeing their freedoms taken away. And then the rest of America is asking themselves, well, we were just promised that costs would go down on day one, and it's like day 325, and the president has completely taken his eye off the ball. So no, it's not going to go away. He can do this now the easy way, or I would suggest to you that life is going to be very difficult for Kash and Kristi Noem and others when Democrats are in the majority. We have the subpoena power, we bring accountability, and it all will come out.
And even before that, there's that scathing internal report which calls the FBI a rudderless ship under Patel. Where does this leave his standing in the Trump administration? And can you envision a scenario where the White House replaces him?
Well, every week he embarrasses himself and then embarrasses the Trump administration. And I am hearing from FBI agents that they just want to do their core job, which is to protect us from terrorism, public corruption, espionage that's taking place on the homeland, and of course, violent crimes and child sex trafficking. That's what they signed up to do. That's what they're trained to do. Instead, they're going after the president's enemies. They're participating in immigration raids. They're scrubbing the Epstein files to protect the president from being connected to Jeffrey Epstein. It's really disgraced our men and women in law enforcement. And by the way, Alex, they've lost a lot of talent. If they haven't fired these individuals on their own accord, they're leaving because they don't want anything to do with this.
Let's go back to the boat strikes now, because the Trump administration is facing increased scrutiny as officials cannot agree on the origins of the September 2nd double military strike. So here's what Hegseth had to say the day after.
I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented.
Okay, jump forward to the cabinet meeting this week. Both Hegseth and Trump denied any direct role. Here's that.
I watched that first strike live.
As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting.
I didn't know about the second strike. I didn't know anything about people. I wasn't involved.
Yeah, it was 48 minutes. But as the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of Defense, how concerning is it that neither claim any knowledge of what was happening in real time? And why can't officials agree on the actions of that day?
It's a real problem. Either the president is completely checked out or is suffering, from some illness that prevents him from being aware, or he's just straight lying to the American people. Neither are satisfactory. And as to the question of whether this is a war crime, I don't know if it's a war crime because I don't remember Congress voting to declare war on Venezuela. It might just be a crime when you, without any evidence, and they're unwilling to provide evidence to the American people, just blow people out of the water. And then to take it one step farther, the way I see it is when I talk to my constituents across California, and Alex, I'm having a 4-year-old meltdown just over my shoulder. When I talk to constituents across California, going to war with Venezuela ranks about 200th on their priorities. They tell me, and I was just in the Central Valley this week, they tell me their top priority is to bring down the cost of meat and vegetables, not to increase the number of wars that the United States is participating in.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm a mom. Half the people who are watching us are parents. They understand what you're going through. But let me ask you about widely reporting the 30-year-old pipe bomb suspect confessed to the FBI that he believed in 2020 elections conspiracy theories. How do you expect this case to proceed? And could the suspect be covered by this broader January 6th clemency that was issued by President Trump?
Yeah, that clemency is not looking any better each day, either because he let 1,600 individuals go free, many of them who committed violent crimes, many of them who would go on to commit more crimes once they were free. And now the potential that it covers an individual who left explosive pipe bombs at the Capitol. And I just want to take you back to that day, because when I got an email from the Capitol Police as I was in the chamber, sheltering in place as the mob was pounding on the doors outside the chamber, the email said potential pipe bombs around the Capitol. I sent a text message to my wife. I said, I love you. Please kiss our babies. That's what every member, Republicans and Democrats, were sending to their loved ones because we didn't know what was going to happen next. And these are the types of people that the president would want to free. It's sick. And again, in the spirit of what we were talking about earlier, it's a disgrace and disrespects our men and women in law enforcement who protected us that day.
Yeah, it's always chilling to think about that day. Let me ask you one more question, because you recently announced you're running for governor of California. And we're, of course, going to talk with you about your positions during the campaign. But will taking on Trump be a constant theme of your campaign? And does your time in Congress now, during his second term, give you an added edge to do it?
Well, first, Alex, in California, people are scared and prices are high. That's why I'm running for governor. And yes, I am in the fight in real time right now against the president. I've done that with the Russian investigation, the 2 impeachments, the only lawsuit that survived the January 6th attack, which survived this president taking office again, which was for the January 6th attack. I go on offense with this president, and I'll do that for Californians as he chases immigrants through the fields where they work, puts troops in our streets, and tries to cut cancer funding. But there's a day beyond Trump, and that's what really excites me about this race, is to bring my experience as a city council member, a planning commissioner, of course, in Congress, to address the cost crisis and create more homeowners in California. That's why I'm running. I'm excited to do it. It's a June primary, but not taking my eye off the ball of what we have to do against this president. But doing it in California, Alex, we showed when we passed Prop 50, you can save California, but also help save the country at the same time.
Listen, you are preaching to the congregation, because I am nothing if I'm not a California girl. That's what I am.
Good.
So
and by the way,
good.
The hardest job I have, whether it's governor, Congress, is taking care of these 3 kids under 8. So this is a breeze compared to anything
Good
else.
on you for that. Thank you for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you again.
Was it a war crime or wasn't it? That's the question swirling around Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the man handpicked by Donald Trump to run his rechristened Department of War. But before we get there, it's worth zooming out for a moment. From upending the economy and declaring war on American cities to weaponizing the legal system against critics and mostly failing, This administration's approach seems anchored in unleashing unspeakable harm and chaos, all in service of feeding Donald Trump's ego, expanding executive power, and distracting from an historically unpopular presidency. This approach comes straight out of the Center for Renewing America, a right-wing think tank launched in 2021 to help prepare for a second Trump presidency. It was founded by Russell Vought, whom you'll recall is the architect of Project 2025 and Trump's current director of the Office of Management and Budget, an incredibly powerful perch from which to oversee the deployment of Project 2025. While Vought wasn't advocating lawlessness, many of the leaders and senior fellows of the Center for Renewing America now serve inside Trump's cabinet, including Vought himself and Kash Patel. And it was that think tank, Russell Vought's think tank, that first drafted ideas like invoking the Insurrection Act against U.S. cities, firing civil servants en masse, and dismantling internal legal constraints. In a private 2024 speech, he said, quote, "I don't want President Trump having to lose a moment of time having fights in the Oval Office about whether something is legal or doable or moral," end quote. So, cue to what's going on right now with the boat strikes. For several months, Hegseth has been directing a highly controversial military campaign in the Caribbean without congressional authorization or oversight. The Pentagon claims that it is targeting drug smuggling boats that are carrying narcotics to the United States, but has provided no evidence to support those assertions. Criticism of the campaign escalated after the Washington Post reported last week, according to two unnamed people with direct knowledge of the operation, that Hegseth issued a verbal order before the very first strike on September the 2nd to, quote, "kill everybody," end quote. Now, in military parlance, that's known as a no-quarter order, an instruction to leave no survivors. If true, a no-quarter order would violate both U.S. military law and international law. Hegseth, the White House, and Admiral Bradley have denied that Hegseth gave such an order. Crucially, it doesn't matter whether the survivors on those boats were civilians, combatants, or criminals. The order to kill survivors itself is a war crime if we take the administration at its word that it considers this an armed conflict. If, however, we aren't in an armed conflict, which we aren't, then the killing of the survivors, who would be considered civilians, is murder. Members of Congress, many of whom were already critical of the broader Caribbean campaign, which seems to be targeting Venezuela more than it's targeting drugs, have now opened inquiries into what happened on that day. And here's what we know. On September 2nd, U.S. forces struck a vessel allegedly involved in drug trafficking. The first strike disabled the boat, leaving survivors clinging to debris. 11 people were killed in total, including 2 survivors who died in a follow-up strike, a so-called double tap, which may also be considered a war crime under international law. The Pentagon has carried out 22 strikes in total, killing at least 87 people. For its part, the Trump administration claims the U.S. is engaged in a non-international armed conflict, which is a designation that matters because such campaigns require congressional authorization. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the president must consult Congress before introducing U.S. forces into hostilities unless Congress independently formally declares war. But the administration has attempted to sidestep that law, arguing that the War Powers Resolution applies only when U.S. service members are placed in harm's way. Because the strikes are conducted remotely, they claim these don't qualify as hostilities. In other words, yes, we're in an armed conflict, but no, we technically haven't introduced U.S. forces into any hostilities because technology allows us to strike from far away, which effectively means we're blowing boats out of the water with no evidence and no due process, something most of us have only ever understood to be murder. In America, we're supposed to prosecute people for their crimes and try them. We're not supposed to indiscriminately kill them. And if we tried these alleged drug dealers and found them to be guilty in a court of law, none of them would actually face the death penalty. And in what certainly seems like an admission, Donald Trump himself said the quiet part out loud back in October.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
Be like dead. And that raises the central legal question. Is the United States actually in an armed conflict with the people on these boats? Or is our government just committing flat-out murder? This matters because 2 completely different legal frameworks apply depending on the answer. Many experts say the administration's claim of armed conflict is highly dubious. Under the laws of armed conflict, suspected drug cartels are not organized armed groups capable of the sustained intense hostilities required to trigger international law. But let's assume for argument's sake that this is an armed conflict. If so, the laws of war apply, or what's known as international humanitarian law, which clearly prohibits targeting civilians, killing wounded or defenseless survivors, failing to rescue those in distress, and issuing or obeying no-quarter orders. Deliberately killing survivors and issuing orders to kill everybody are, therefore, war crimes. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and many military lawyers have called the second strike on September 2nd a war crime based on public reports. The duty to rescue shipwrecked or wounded survivors is one of the oldest principles of international law. It protects civilians and service members alike and has endured because of a norm known as reciprocity. We protect your survivors, you protect ours. The U.S. actually helped establish this norm during World War II, explicitly rejecting the Japanese Navy's no survivors policy and condemning the killing of helpless sailors as inhumane. America's treatment of survivors in that war would become the foundation for modern maritime law. Crossing the line today endangers U.S. troops and shatters an 80-year framework that's keeping them safe. Now, let's look at the other option. Legally, there's no armed conflict, which there isn't, then domestic law applies. Under U.S. law, killing people outside of combat without trial is, quite simply, murder. It's an extrajudicial killing. A conflict does not become an armed conflict simply because Trump calls it one. To qualify, the opposing forces in which America is in conflict must be an organized armed group engaged in sustained, intense hostilities. Legal experts overwhelmingly agree. Drug cartels do not meet that standard. So if this was not an armed conflict, and again, there has been no legal determination that it is part of an armed conflict, then the killings would instead fall under U.S. criminal law, the Universal Code of Military Justice, and maritime law, which governs peacetime navigation. And the rule in all of them is simple. You cannot kill people, criminals or otherwise, without due process. Since the Washington Post's allegations surfaced, the Trump administration and Hegseth have done everything possible to distance themselves from that September 2nd strike. Amid the fallout, Hegseth appears to have found a potential fall guy, Admiral Frank Bradley, the Special Operations Commander who oversaw the mission. In classified briefings Thursday, Bradley told lawmakers investigating Hegseth's alleged kill-all order that no such directive came from the defense secretary. But days before that private briefing, the White House was already working to distance Hegseth from the strikes. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed. Hegseth, that same day, appeared to shift blame to Admiral Bradley, posting on X, quote, "Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us," end quote. I stand by him and the combat decisions he's made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. That's very odd phrasing. And it's very telling. It reads less like support for your subordinate and more like a legal play. Hegseth doubled down on Tuesday, saying, quote, "All these strikes, they're making judgment calls, ensuring they defend the American people." Notice that he's conspicuously leaving out any mention of his own role in the operation. For 2 days in a row, he went out of his way to stress that Admiral Bradley made these combat decisions. And this might be part of the reason that 6 Democratic lawmakers with military and intelligence experience released a video last month warning service members to disobey unlawful orders. They understand that if things go wrong, the soldier pulling the trigger will be held accountable. As Congressman Seth Moulton, himself a Marine veteran, put it, quote, "Mark my words, it may take some time, but Americans will be prosecuted for this, either as a war crime or outright murder." And if you think a Trump pardon is going to protect subordinates, think again. Presidential pardons do not extend to international law. War crimes prosecutions can proceed long after any administration ends. Soldiers could face lifelong consequences, even arrest abroad. As attorney and Iraq war vet Steve Kennedy put it, quote, "As both a lawyer and someone who once followed orders for a living, American service members have not been allowed to use just following orders as a defense for more than half a century. Since the 1950s, every soldier, sailor, Marine, and airman has been trained on this point. These regulations are not merely aspirational. Service members have been and continue to be jailed for illegal uses of force, and the just following orders defense has never saved them. To every service member, every commander, and every political leader, if you commit a war crime or an extrajudicial killing outside of an actual war, you can be prosecuted, if not by this administration, then by a future one. Please do not condemn yourself to prison and a lifetime of guilt for Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, end quote. Hegseth's own record, by the way, only casts the Caribbean allegations in a more alarming light. In his book, The War on Warriors, he brags about telling U.S. soldiers in Iraq to ignore legal guidance on rules of engagement, telling them, quote, "I will not allow that nonsense to filter into your brains." He praises a commander who reportedly ordered troops to kill all military-aged males and mocks lawful restraint as nothing more than BS rules. That commander, by the way, was later reprimanded for issuing that order. Hegseth goes further, by the way, questioning the entire legal framework governing armed conflict. He wrote, quote, "If our warriors are forced to follow rules arbitrarily and asked to sacrifice more lives so that international tribunals feel better about themselves, aren't we just better off winning our wars according to our own rules? Who cares what other countries think?" End quote.
Now to a new poll of young voters that shows just 29% approve of the job President Trump is doing. But Democrats in the latest Harvard Youth poll out this week are not faring too well either. 27% of Gen Z voters say they approve of congressional Democrats. And joining me now, Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost and Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Both Democrats are hosting the Mad Soul Music and Arts Festival today in Orlando, which brings together music and political advocacy. So welcome to you both. I am going to get to the Mad Soul Fest in a moment, but Congressman Frost, I just have to tell you real quick, my anchor producer here in the studio, she was in your class at University of Central Florida. You were the class president. She's fangirling you. Just so you know. Just saying. But anyway, the question I will put out to you first is, from both parties, it stems from the affordability issue, what's going on, these low numbers pretty much. How do you interpret what's going on?
Well, I actually think back to the campaign cycle last year when I was traveling around the country for Kamala Harris, because what I would do is I would go into a college Democrats rally, which was always great. But the issues you heard about in that room were always just a little different than the issues I heard about when I'd just walk around the campus and talk with random young people. And when I'd ask them, what do you care about? They would say the fact that I can't afford a place to live. They would say the fact that I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. And in fact, here in my district, I started one of my satellite offices at the campus of the University of Central Florida. I thought people would want mainly help on student loan debt and things like that, which is one of our top 3 issues. But actually the top 2 were housing insecurity and people who are hungry on the college campus. So, a lot of times people feel like young people have a different set of issues. They actually don't. They're going through the same things everyone else is, just through a different lens, and in many ways more vulnerable and susceptible to be taken advantage of.
So, Congressman Pressley, I'm curious your takeaway from those numbers, and overall, what do you hear from your constituents on the affordability issue, and where do they lay the blame?
Well, I think it's important that we meet young people where they are. I want to co-sign what my good friend here was offering, that it's not just about those more curated spaces, but meeting young people where they are and then actively listening to them and being led by them. Very often we just engage young people for their sweat equity in campaigns, but we need to be engaging them for their thought leadership as well. We need to be hiring them. We need to be stipending them. We need to be in their ideas. And then when we have the power, we have to use it. That's what I hear from young people, is just that there is there's a deficit of trust and a degraded hope, because even if they use their voice at the ballot box, will we make good on those promises? Will we use our power? What young people want is if someone from our community has been kidnapped, they want us to go find them. If there's someone in the community being surveyed or targeted or a victim of bigotry or discrimination, that we vigorously condemn it. If families are being separated and denied their due process, that we use every lever available. They're looking for us to fight, and they're looking for us to be exhaustive in our efforts, because they're exhausted.
Yeah. I hate hearing that the youth of today are losing a sense of hope right now. That's just, you don't want that on any level. But, Congressman, I want to ask about the control of Congress after Tennessee's closer than expected results for Democrats on Tuesday. Here's Congressman Jim Clyburn earlier on MS Now. Take a listen.
And so I really believe we're well on our way to a blue wave, and it's going to happen. You mentioned 40 seats. This may blunt it. It may only be 30, but the wave is coming. People are anxious.
So it may seem early, and I'll say in the last hour I had Chris Matthews on the show. He predicted 30 will be lost by the Republicans. I'm curious your reaction to both of them.
I don't really get into predicting how many seats are going to be won or lost. What I can tell you is the people of this country are very much in disagreement with what Donald Trump is doing, from terrorizing our communities with ICE to the fact that he's done not just nothing on the affordability crisis, but that he's actually made it worse for people. And that he lied and told people he would unrig the economy for the working class when he's actually rigging it even more for billionaires just like him. And people are seeing that in broad daylight. But I want to make sure that we understand something, that just because our opposition isn't doing a good job doesn't mean anything's just going to be handed to us. So I remember my first term in Congress, everyone told me, wait till we're in the majority next term, wait till we're in the majority next term. I'm in my next term, we're not in the majority. And I really think that what we do with the numbers, what we do with the situation we're in will dictate how many seats we get. So yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident, but I'm not just going to rest because Donald Trump is making horrible decisions. We knew he would make these decisions. We warned people about it in the last election. Now we got to go and tell folks, look, I'm not concerned with the way you voted last November. I'm concerned with the way you vote next November. And this is about addition and subtraction. And so we got to get that sweat equity on the line. We got to go out and win every seat that we can, and make sure that people know that no matter what community you're from the most rural of communities to cities in our country, that Democrats are there for you. And if we don't get that message across to everyone, we're not going to do as well as we think we are. But I'm feeling very confident going into next year because we're seeing these wins in the special elections. We're at this music festival right now that I've been putting together for years. I'm really happy to have Representative Ayanna Pressley here, Representative Justin Jones, Deli Ramirez, a bunch of bands. And we're bringing together, especially a lot of young people who usually don't get involved in politics. And this way that we can get people to understand that politics is something that is about you, right? And there's something that you can do about it. And that's what the whole event's about.
The mix of music and politics. It's a great way to get out the message. Congressman Pressley, you announced this week your decision to pass on a potential Senate bid that would have challenged longtime legislator Senator Ed Markey. There is talk of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez potentially challenging Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. How critical is generational change for Democrats, and is that time now?
Well, what I would say is that this moment demands, and what the American people deserve, are leaders who will advance policy solutions and ideas that go as far and as deep as the herd. What people want are leaders that will meet them in community where they are, that will do the work of transformation and not just transaction in an election cycle, that are organizing, mobilizing year round, that are doing the work of informing and empowering them. And what my good sister there, we came in the 116th Congress together. What she does so well is not just talk about what will be possible with Democrats in power. She reminds people of their power. And that's exactly what this Mad Soul Fest is about. It's about reminding everyone of our collective power. You know, Shirley Chisholm once said that leaders are not found, they are created. They are created by the urgency of an electorate that decides that they want more, they want better, and that they deserve it. And then they go and fight for that and organize for that. I don't think this is about weathering the next 4 years. I think we're shaping the next 100, and that's going to take everyone. I think ultimately elections are won by ideas, and why the Democrats, young people did not go to the Republicans. They just stayed home. And we've always been the party of the future and of aspiration and of boldness. And that's really where we need to continue to be and to lead. And I'm just so excited that the Congressional Progressive Caucus continues to grow. And I'm excited to be running for re-election to the House, because I do believe my work there is unfinished.
So I do want to ask you both about the Mad Soul Festival. And Congressman, you got a chance to weigh in on that. So I'll put this to the Congresswoman in terms of what you hope to accomplish with this mix of music and politics.
Well, the thing is, the arts have always played a role in movement building. When I think of the early chapters of the civil rights movement, and I think of everyone from Harry Belafonte to Lena Horne, and the likes that were there singing freedom songs, and just really this moment is about everyone bringing their gifts to the work of resistance. But it's not just about resistance; it's also about radically dreaming. It's about that North Star, continuing to organize for that, and I do believe we'll get the reward on the other side. People are looking for community, so I thank Congressman Frost for his visionary leadership, for his marrying of cool and consciousness. People are looking for a low barrier to entry, to feel connected and a part of community, and to feel empowered in this moment. And that's exactly what Mad Soul is about. And I said, we're going to be unapologetic, not only in our mad soul, but in our mad joy, in our organizing and our mobilizing. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. And I'm just happy to be here.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. Congressman, you have just 10 seconds. Anything you want to add to that? Because that was a pretty good summary right there.
I mean, yeah, there's not much to add to it. I will say last year we found that 90% of the people who came to this event, it was their first political event that they'd ever been to in their life. So this is an opportunity for them to hear from national leaders. We're going to have a lot of local leaders speak. And the name of the game for us here is we want everybody who comes to this festival to walk out having made a commitment to themselves to get engaged with one of our amazing organizations here locally. And the more that we do that work year round, the more we're going to win. But like Representative Presley said, the more we're showing people that we're about transformational politics, not transactional politics.
All right. Congressman Maxwell Frost, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I want to thank you both. Have some mad fun. It all sounds so great. All right. Appreciate you both. Thank you.